The bus screeched as it came to a stop, its worn-out brakes announcing its arrival at the corner of Hill Street and Magnolia Avenue. Keisha climbed aboard, weaving her way through the crowd as the driver called out the stops in a steady, rhythmic tone. She held her backpack close, its fabric worn thin, and the zipper barely holding on. After a long day at Jefferson Middle School, she was exhausted, but a sense of curiosity and kindness still lingered in her eyes. As the bus jolted forward, Keisha noticed an elderly woman standing near the center aisle. Her silver hair was neatly tucked under a floral scarf, and she leaned on a cane for support. The woman, dressed in a faded but clean dress, swayed slightly with the movement of the bus, gripping the overhead rail with white-knuckled hands. Despite the bus being packed, no one seemed to offer her a seat. Keisha hesitated briefly, glancing at an empty seat her tired legs longed for. But when she saw the elderly woman struggling to keep her balance, her decision was made. Standing up, she motioned toward the seat. "Here, ma'am. You can sit here." The woman turned and smiled warmly. "Thank you, dear," she said, easing herself into the seat with a relieved sigh. "You're very kind." "It's no trouble," Keisha replied, gripping the pole to steady herself as the bus continued down the road. The woman gave her a thoughtful look, her eyes lingering on Keisha's worn shoes and the way she clutched her bag as if it held more than just school supplies. "What's your name, dear?" the woman asked gently. "Keisha," she answered, her voice light but clear. "And yours?" "Evelyn," the woman replied, smiling. "Nice to meet you, Keisha. Not many young people would give up their seat like you did." Keisha shrugged slightly, a small smile on her face. "My mom says it's just the right thing to do." Miss Evelyn chuckled softly. "Your mother raised you well." The bus slowed as it neared another stop, more passengers squeezing in. Keisha tightened her grip on the pole, but didn't seem bothered by the crowd. There was something comforting about Miss Evelyn's presence, like sitting near a warm fireplace on a cold night. "Do you take this bus often?" Miss Evelyn asked after a pause. Keisha nodded. "Every day after school. I live a little past Oakmont Avenue. Jefferson Middle School, right?" Miss Evelyn's eyes gleamed with recognition. "Yeah," Keisha said, slightly surprised. "How did you know?" "My granddaughter went there years ago." "It's a good school," Miss Evelyn said, her voice softening. "She wanted to be a doctor, too, just like you." Keisha blinked. "How do you know I?" Miss Evelyn smiled knowingly. "I can tell. You have that spark, the kind that doesn't go out easily." Keisha felt her face warm with embarrassment, but before she could say anything, the bus stopped again. A few people got off, giving her more room to stand comfortably. Miss Evelyn shifted in her seat, glancing at Keisha's bag. "Seems like you have a lot on your mind," she said quietly. "Big dreams come with big challenges, don't they?" Keisha hesitated, unsure why the woman's words resonated so deeply. "Yeah," she finally admitted, "they do." She glanced down at her bag, hugging it a little closer. It wasn't that she didn't want to share her thoughts with Miss Evelyn, but her dreams felt fragile, like they could be easily crushed by reality. Still, Miss Evelyn's calm demeanor made her want to open up. "I've always wanted to be a doctor," Keisha said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the bus. "But it's hard to even think about sometimes. My mom works 2 jobs just to keep us going, and college feels so far away." Miss Evelyn nodded, her cane resting across her lap. Her eyes didn't show pity, but a deep understanding. "Dreams like that are never easy," she said, "but the ones that matter the most rarely are." Keisha smiled faintly. "That's what my mom says, too." "She's a smart woman," Miss Evelyn replied. "And you've got that fire inside you. It's the kind that doesn't just light your own path, but guides others too." Keisha gazed out the window as familiar streets passed by in a blur. "Sometimes I think about giving up," she confessed. "But then I remember my little brother. He always says he wants to be like me when he grows up. I can't let him down." Miss Evelyn placed a hand on Keisha's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You won't," she said firmly. As long as you keep going, you're already setting an example. The bus jolted again, and Miss Evelyn adjusted herself. She reached into her large handbag, rummaging for a moment before pulling out a small envelope. "Here," she said, handing it to Keisha. "This is for you." Keisha stared at the envelope, hesitant. "What is it?" Miss Evelyn smiled. "Let's just say it might help you on your way. Open it when you get home." Keisha took the envelope, feeling its surprising weight. "I can't." "You can and you will," Miss Evelyn interrupted, her tone firm but kind. "Promise me you'll open it." Keisha nodded and tucked the envelope into her bag. "Okay, I promise." The bus slowed again as Miss Evelyn's stop approached. She stood, leaning on her cane, and gave Keisha one last look. "You've got a bright future ahead, Keisha. Don't let anyone dim it." Keisha watched as Miss Evelyn exited the bus, her floral scarf fluttering in the wind. For a moment, the bus felt quieter, as if everything had faded into the background. As the bus pulled away, Keisha held her bag tighter. Whatever was in that envelope, she felt it was something important, something that could change everything. The bus squealed to a stop, its brakes letting out a weary groan at the intersection of Hill Street and Magnolia Avenue. Keisha climbed aboard, making her way through the crowded passengers as the driver called out stops in his usual rhythmic tone. She clutched her old backpack, its edges fraying and zipper barely holding together, after another long day at Jefferson Middle School. Despite being exhausted, a spark of curiosity and kindness remained in her eyes. As the bus jerked forward, Keisha noticed an elderly woman standing near the middle of the aisle. The woman's silver hair was neatly tucked under a floral scarf, and she leaned on a cane for support. Her faded but clean dress swayed with each motion of the bus, her knuckles tight around the overhead rail. The bus was packed, yet no one stood to offer her a seat. Keisha hesitated, glancing at the empty seat she was about to take, her tired legs urging her to sit. But seeing the elderly woman struggling, her decision was made. "Here, ma'am," she said, standing and motioning toward the seat. The elderly woman turned, her face softening into a smile. "Thank you, young lady," she said with a sigh of relief, sitting down. "You're very kind." "No problem," Keisha replied, gripping the pole as the bus rumbled along. The woman, whose name was Evelyn, studied Keisha, noticing the wear and tear on her shoes and how she held her bag close, as though it contained something more precious than school books. "What's your name, dear?" the woman asked gently. "Keisha," she responded with a light smile. "And yours?" "Miss Evelyn," she replied warmly. "You know, not many young people are as thoughtful as you." Keisha shrugged slightly. "My mom says it's just the right thing to do." Miss Evelyn chuckled. "She raised you well." The bus neared its next stop, and more passengers crowded in. Keisha held the pole tighter, swaying but somehow feeling comforted by Miss Evelyn's presence. It reminded her of the warmth of a fireplace on a cold evening. "Do you take this bus often?" Miss Evelyn asked after a pause. "Every day after school," Keisha nodded. "I live past Oakmont Avenue. Jefferson Middle School, right?" Miss Evelyn's eyes twinkled with recognition. Keisha was surprised. "How did you know?" "My granddaughter went there years ago," Miss Evelyn replied, smiling. "She wanted to be a doctor, too, just like you." Keisha blinked in surprise. "How did you know I can see it in you," Miss Evelyn said softly. "You've got that spark, the kind that's hard to put out." Keisha felt her cheeks warm but didn't know what to say. Before she could respond, the bus jolted to another stop and a few people got off, leaving her with more space. Miss Evelyn glanced at Keisha's bag and, sensing something, said quietly, "Big dreams take a lot of work, don't they?" Keisha hesitated, unsure why the woman's words struck a chord with her. "Yeah, they do," she admitted. She hugged her bag closer, feeling protective of her dreams. They often seem fragile, like a small flame that could be easily extinguished by the weight of life. But Miss Evelyn's gentle demeanor made her want to share. I've always wanted to be a doctor, Keisha said softly. But sometimes it's hard to even think about. My mom works 2 jobs just to keep us going, and college feels like it's a million miles away. Miss Evelyn nodded, understanding in her eyes. Dreams like that aren't easy, but the ones that matter never are. Keisha smiled faintly. That's what my mom says too. She's a smart woman, Miss Evelyn agreed. And you, my dear, have that fire inside you. It's the kind of fire that lights up not just your own path, but the way for others too. Keisha looked out the window at the familiar streets passing by. Sometimes I think about giving up, she admitted. But then I remember my little brother. He says he wants to be just like me when he grows up. I don't want to let him down. Miss Evelyn gently placed a hand on Keisha's arm. You won't. Just keep moving forward, and you're already showing him the way. As the bus rattled on, Miss Evelyn reached into her large handbag, pulling out a small envelope. Here, she said, extending it to Keisha. This is for you. Keisha hesitated, staring at the envelope. What is it? Miss Evelyn smiled. It's something that might help you on your journey. Open it when you get home. Keisha took the envelope, feeling its unexpected weight in her hands. I can't take this. You can, Miss Evelyn interrupted kindly, and you will. Promise me you'll open it. Keisha nodded, slipping the envelope into her bag. Okay, I promise. The bus slowed to Miss Evelyn's stop. As she stood, she gave Keisha one last look. You've got a bright future ahead. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Keisha watched as Miss Evelyn stepped off the bus, her floral scarf catching in the breeze. The bus felt quieter after she left, and Keisha clutched her bag, knowing whatever was inside the envelope was important. Back home, Keisha bounded up the steps to their small townhouse. Her brother, Jordan, greeted her at the door, full of energy. What took you so long? He asked. Just the bus, she said, patting his head as she walked inside. The bus squealed to a stop at Hill Street and Magnolia Avenue. Keisha boarded, moving through the passengers, her eyes scanning for a seat. The driver called out the stops, his tone familiar and rhythmic. After a tiring day at Jefferson Middle School, her backpack slung over her shoulder, Keisha noticed an elderly woman standing, clutching the overhead rail, struggling to keep her balance. Here, take my seat, Keisha offered with a gentle smile. Standing up, the woman, Miss Evelyn, smiled gratefully and sat down. You're very kind, she said warmly, settling into the seat. As the bus continued, Miss Evelyn began a conversation. Her gaze never left Keisha, nodding at the right moments, fully engaged. You remind me so much of Mariah, she said softly, her voice filled with both pride and a hint of sorrow. Mariah always lifted others up, no matter what. Keisha hesitated. What happened to her? She asked carefully. Miss Evelyn's eyes dropped to her lap. Mariah passed away 5 years ago, she said quietly. It was a car accident. She was on her way to volunteer at a clinic. Keisha's heart sank at the pain in Miss Evelyn's voice. I'm so sorry. She was my light, Miss Evelyn continued. But I've learned that light doesn't go away. It finds new ways to shine. And when I met you, I saw that same light. A quiet settled between them. Keisha, moved by her words, reached across the table, her hand trembling. I won't let you down, she said firmly. Miss Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. I know you won't, my dear. I wouldn't have given you this opportunity otherwise. As the hours passed, Miss Evelyn shared stories from her life, her struggles, victories, and the wisdom she had gathered. Keisha soaked in every word, feeling as if she was being entrusted with something far greater than just advice. It felt like she was being passed a torch. Before leaving, Miss Evelyn handed her a small book from her shelf. This was Mariah's favorite, she said with a soft smile. I think you'll find it inspiring. Keisha hugged her tightly, whispering, Thank you, Miss Evelyn, for everything. Walking home, Keisha felt an unshakable sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her dreams anymore. It was about honoring a legacy one step at a time. In the following months, Keisha threw herself into her studies with a renewed determination. Miss Evelyn's support wasn't just monetary. It became her constant encouragement. They spoke often, and Miss Evelyn's wisdom acted as a guide, helping her navigate moments of doubt and fatigue. Her teachers began to notice a shift. Keisha was more focused, her grades improved, and she carried herself with a newfound confidence. She spent extra hours in the library, diving into science books and medical journals, determined to reach her goal. Life wasn't easy, though. Her family's struggles hadn't vanished. Keisha still stayed up late to help her younger brother with homework or cook dinner when her mother worked the night shift. But every challenge felt like another step forward toward something bigger. One afternoon, Keisha shared her journey with her science teacher, Mr. Bernard. Holding her scholarship certificate, she explained how Miss Evelyn's kindness had changed her life. Mr. Bernard listened intently, visibly moved by her story. "That's amazing, Keisha," he said. "You're living proof that kindness can truly change a life. If you ever need anything, recommendations, study materials, just let me know." Buoyed by his support, Keisha reached out to more mentors, slowly building a network of people who believed in her. Each connection felt like another stone in the foundation that Miss Evelyn had helped her lay. As Keisha grew, so did the impact of Miss Evelyn's generosity. Word spread throughout the community, inspiring others to support young people with big dreams. Local organizations offered resources, tutoring sessions, and even donated books. Every act, no matter how small, created ripples. Now a high school senior, Keisha began volunteering at a community center, tutoring children who reminded her of her younger brother, Jordan. She shared her story with them, always crediting Miss Evelyn for sparking her journey. Wide-eyed, the kids listened as she encouraged them to dream big, no matter their circumstances. By the time Keisha graduated at the top of her class, her path to medical school was clear. Miss Evelyn, sitting proudly in the front row at her graduation, wore her signature floral scarf, her cane resting beside her. When Keisha took the stage to give her valedictorian speech, she searched the crowd until her eyes met Miss Evelyn's. "This moment isn't just mine," Keisha said, her voice steady and sure. "It belongs to everyone who ever believed in me, especially when I struggled to believe in myself. It belongs to my family and, most of all, to Miss Evelyn, whose kindness showed me that even the smallest gestures can change a life." The applause was thunderous, but Miss Evelyn didn't clap. She simply smiled, her heart full. Years later, as Dr. Keisha Simmons stood proudly at the opening of her pediatric clinic, she looked out at the audience and saw Miss Evelyn sitting there once again. The clinic bore Mariah's name, a tribute to the woman whose legacy had paved Keisha's way. As she cut the ribbon, surrounded by friends, family, and her community, Keisha reflected on how far she had come. Her education, career, and ability to give back had all started with a single moment on a crowded bus. That moment had reminded her, and everyone who heard her story, of the life-changing power of kindness. In the end, it wasn't just about achieving her dreams. It was about using them to light the way for others, just as Miss Evelyn had done for her.